Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whatever time zone that you're joining in. A very warm welcome to 90 Days of DevOps. And we are looking at this community edition wherein every day we have a lot of DevOps things coming in and you have multiple sessions lined up. Please do check out the GitHub repository as well as the website for all the details of different sessions. In today's session, what we are going to talk about is Azure ARM now got Bicep. The title seems a little bit dramatic, but what we are going to talk about is more of a Azure Bicep, which is uh, I'll not say a new, but it's been a while, but it's a new version of Azure ARM that we are looking at. Before we get into it, a little bit about myself. My name is Tushar Kumar. I'm Cloud Security Lead at Codec Ireland. I'm also a Microsoft MVP specific to network and security. In this session, we are going to talk about more of an infrastructure as a code, what all things that we can do, and how you can get started with Bicep. So moving along, about today's agenda. So what to expect in next hour. So we are going to look at a quick introduction. We are going to look at what exactly is infrastructure as a code, or IAC, if you say. What is the differences we have between imperative and declarative code? How Azure Resource Manager works? What is Bicep? What is all about? How you're going to code specifically in Bicep, and what all are couple of advanced features that you have within Bicep. And at last, I'm going to show you a quick view of where you can get started, where you can find more and more resources about Azure Bicep. So moving along, what's infrastructure as a code? So when you look at infrastructure as a code and when you're convincing your organization to go for infrastructure as a code, there's always a pushback. Why can't we do it the portal way? So we are doing it already. We can go in the portal.azure.com and we can deploy things. Okay. That pushback, and when you're making a decision, you need to understand why infrastructure as a code is important. So you start with, let's say, imagine you are building a house. So traditionally what you're going to do is you're going to purchase all the materials, you're going to get all the tools, and what you're going to do, you're going to make it brick by brick, and you're going to build that house. That's going to be a consuming process. And if someone had a crazy idea, they can do it some a different way, or maybe they can just miss something and they can just like mess up the whole house itself. Now, the very next day, you want to build another house and you want to do the same thing. But at that point of time, what will happen is you need to do the process all over again. Go and buy the materials, start doing it from the scratch, doing each brick by brick build by yourself. But what if there is a way where you can make sure that you create a blueprint and that gets replicated over and over into multiple houses? So, with infrastructure as a code, what you do is you create a blueprint of your house basically. And what you're doing is everything is written, everything is coded, and what you do with the existing tools and materials, and you just start replicating the same model to onto a multiple places. So that gives you a consistency between multiple places. So if you're building the first house went well, the second house will also go well because you're following the same blueprint. Also, that gives you a lot of a lot of automation in place. So like let's say how you're going to do your brick wall things and everything, you can just automate all those stuff. So similarly, what when you're creating your infrastructure in cloud, and if you are doing it manual portal way, going onto portal, deploying one virtual network, deploying one app service, deploying one cognitive service, and then again the very next day when you need another one, you go in and then deploy it. You might mess up with deploying it in different resource group, different region, or different maybe different configuration. In order to overcome all of that, infrastructure as a code is going to be the recommended way. So if you're maintaining a large infrastructure, if you're maintaining a small infrastructure, it doesn't matter. If you want to keep automation, consistency, as well as the reproducibility in your code, in your environment, then you have to make sure that you follow the infrastructure as a code practice. So basically, all of the infrastructure as a code, there is multiple vendors available at this point of time. So if you look at AWS, they have CloudFormation. If you look at from multi-cloud perspective, you have Terraform. We have Azure Resource Manager templates for Azure, where we can do the deployments with the JSON templates. Similarly, if you are going all the way back, you can even use PowerShell to do deployments. You can use Azure CLI to do the deployments, and you can have the deployments coded into your into files, and you can do the repeatable deployments with that. So before we go even further, we need to see a very important concept, which is basically what is imperative and what is declarative code. Okay, so understanding the imperative and declarative code is going to be really important when you are deciding between what technology to use and how you are going to do it. So basically, let's say if you are going with let's say you are doing some tasks, right? And it's the same as building a house. So imperative code is going to be like your step-by-step instruction. So you are going to dig into the soil. You are going to put the foundation in. You are going to build the house on top of that with all the bricks and everything. Declarative is just say, I want to build a house, and the house is built. Okay, so you just tell, on the other end, you are telling what is the desired outcome that you want instead of telling the step-by-step instruction. Okay, so when we do a lot of like in even in infrastructure as a code, and when you're doing the CLI ways, you are telling the step-by-step ways instead of telling what is the state that you want, what is the final product, or maybe what is going to be the final outcome that you need. So that's where the imperative and declarative code comes into the picture. So this is going to be a really important concept when we go forward along this presentation. Before that, let's understand Azure Resource Manager. So this is one of the concept which has been always there when we started with Azure. So whenever you interact with your services on Azure, no matter it from Azure Portal, from Azure CLIs, from your REST APIs, it always interacts with Azure Resource Manager. So Azure Resource Manager is basically the management layer, and where it is basically a centralized place which gives you like way of interacting to all the services, all the applications, and even from the all services perspective, you will be interacting with Azure Resource Manager. So it basically works as I'll say more of a orchestration or a management layer. On top of that, orchestration will not be a right word, which interacts with the underlying services that you are deploying. Okay, there is a lot of others. There can be a lot of other mechanisms. You can go with the Azure Resource Manager template. So if you've heard of Azure Resource Manager templates, that Azure Resource Manager templates as well interacts directly with Azure Resource Manager. Okay, so what is Bicep? So when we talk about Bicep, Bicep is basically a domain-specific language. What does domain-specific language mean? So it's basically a purpose-built or for a specific domain or for a specific scenario, you can say. It is not meant to be used as a standard programming language to write application. It's a purpose-built for infrastructure as a code. And the reason why we looked at the differences for declarative and imperative is because Bicep is going to be a declarative language. So when we say declarative, you are going to tell what is going to be the target's you are expecting. So it's basically more of an outcome that you are defining, not you are not defining the steps that how to reach that outcome. So you are not telling someone, okay, you are going to take right from that and you are going to left from that corner and then you'll reach that place. You are just saying you need to go to that place, and then it decides automatically that how you are going to reach to that particular place. Okay, so basically this is Bicep gives you more flexibility and everything around. It basically works on top of your Azure Resource Manager. Okay, so there is a funny thing when you start looking at Bicep, when you start looking at exploring Bicep, what happens behind the scenes? So Resource Manager, the Azure Resource Manager that we saw on the last slide, basically the Resource Manager still operates on the JSON templates. And if you know the JSON templates, these are the same old ARM templates that we used to do in JSON, which is basically gets submitted to the ARM layer and it gets deployed. So when you submit a Bicep template for a deployment, what is happening underneath that is your resource manager is converting that into JSON, and that JSON is getting deployed to Azure. And that process is particularly called transpilation. And that transpilation is basically making sure whatever you have written in a Bicep template gets to your ARM, and basically the ARM is able to understand that overall template. Okay, so why should we use Bicep? So basically, we already had Azure ARM templates. We used to call ARM templates or ARM templates. So what Bicep gives you is simpler syntax. So the first thing is if you have ever written a JSON template for any deployment, right? You will agree with me that it's way too hard to write a ARM template with all the JSON and the quotes and the curly braces coming in, and it's like it's a nightmare if you miss anything, and if you or maybe if you make anything wrong to find a particular thing. Second thing is it cannot be modularized. So what you get with Bicep is you can create modules that you can reutilize going forward. Third thing is it is automated dependency management, which is basically if there is any dependencies that it can see, although we find sometimes that we have to do a little bit of dependency management, but most of the times it is doing automated dependency management. When you are doing any sort of when you are authoring a particular Bicep template, what happens is you are getting the interlicense, which is basically helping you write the template. So at any point of time, let's say if you want to start with a template, and we are going to see that in a quick demo after this. So IntelliSense is always helping you out. Same as when you, if you have worked with C Sharp, if you have worked with any other programming languages where you are getting suggestions from your IDE, that's basically you are getting. The third one is basically going to be the Azure Native. And the reason why we call it Azure Native and the reason why we are calling it that it is embedded with the system is just because Bicep is a native language which is tightly integrated with Azure ARM. So what you are getting as part of this is if there is any new service coming in, if there is any new API coming in, what you are getting out of it is basically everything is included on the day one itself. So let's say Cognitive Services comes with a new API at some point of time this week, you will be able to deploy that with Bicep this week. Okay, there is no state management, so you don't. So Bicep basically checks with the existing state of your Azure environment itself. So there is no state management where you have to keep a state file in a different folder or a storage account just to maintain your Azure state. Uh, there is an easy transition from JSON. So we talked about the first one where the Bicep template gets translated into JSON, there is a other way around as well, where you can look at where you can translate a existing ARM template into Bicep as well. Okay. There are a couple of things that you need to make sure that you are not using, or if you are in need of those, Bicep will not be a right choice. And the best example of that will be, let's say, if you are going multi-cloud, since it is Azure native and it is dependent on Azure ARM, that means it is not flexible for you to deploy it to go into multi-cloud approach. Okay. Now, there is a quick view of what we are looking at. So on the left-hand side of the screen, if you see here, which is basically an ARM template. If you look at the right-hand side of screen, it is the same thing defined in Bicep. So if you look at these two examples, right, if you have to do the same thing in ARM templates, you have to go with all the API versions. You have to define like a lot of codes and a lot of brackets that I can see on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you can see it's much, much simpler, wherein we are looking at what's the resource type is, what's the name is going to be, what's the location is going to be, and that's well and good. And then we can just skip the rest of the curly braces or brackets and all. So now it's up to you which one you want to pick. This is an example which shows you like a not very much different, and I'll say it is not a huge difference, but you will see on a lot of things, you will see like a huge difference wherein with Bicep you can do it in 1 or 2 lines instead of going with 15-20 lines of ARM template. So the choice is yours after this, which one you want to go with and which one is going to be your preference for this one. So now let's see some Bicep code. So we'll just quickly switch over to our Visual Studio Code. And I have some predefined. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Yeah, so what I have done is I have created a couple of scenarios that we can look at, that what all Biceps can do. So first thing is when we start with how you are going to define a resource. Okay, so when we start with resource, the resource definition is pretty much simple. So if you can see it here, we are doing a resource deployment for an Azure storage account. All you need to do is give a deployment a name. So it's going to be a storage account deployment. Pick on what feature that you're using. So this is basically the API version that we are using. So it's 2022-9001. Then define what is going to be the properties of the storage account. Let's say the properties here is the name of the storage account, location of the storage account, SKU of the storage account, the kind of the storage account, and the access tier that you want to take. This looks a little bit heavy, but let's see a quick thing. Let's try to do maybe a resource deployment. So let's see resource, and if we say storage account again, or maybe virtual machine, or maybe virtual network. So there you go. The IntelliSense is helping me out doing all the required pieces. So let's say the virtual network requires an address space. I do 172.0.0/24, and I just close the quotes and I just do enter, and it gives me what exactly is going to be the next one. So basically, you can define your resources, and every resource that you deploy, you are basically getting everything around that. You are getting all the details around that, what exactly is required, what all properties that you must need, and what all properties that you have to put for this particular piece. Okay, let's get rid of this. So this is more of a resource definition. So any resource that you define, right, every resource will start with a resource here, and you can basically define after that what is going to be the resource type, and you can pick and choose between those. Okay, let's move along. So what you can do is similar to any programming language, what you can do is you can utilize the functionality of using parameters and variables. So I have like a couple of things crunched into this. We'll talk through each and everything here. So basically here on the bottom of this, what we are creating is an app service. So the app service requires a name. So basically, when we are creating an app service, there might be a possibility that we use the same app service definition for 5 different app service, or maybe we want to change some app service. We want to make sure uh, if there is 10 different places where I'm calling the app service name, it should be it can be with just a change of one variable, I can change it to all the places. So that's where the variable comes into the picture. So we have variable app service name here where we have defined that it is toy product launch one, which is going to be the name of our app service. Now comes the parameters. So variables are going to be the local to that particular uh, file. Okay. Parameters is something that you can either pass it on through the through the module, or you can pass it on using your any of using a module. We are going to talk about modules in a couple of minutes. So basically, if you are doing a parameter, what you can do is you can define what kind of parameter it is going to be. It can be a string, it can be a array, it can be a integer. Okay, so based on the type that you were expecting in that particular parameter, you can basically say what is going to be allowed, what is going to be the particular parameter type. So let's say in this case, just because I'm taking the location and the location is going to be a string, that's why I'm going to use east_us as parameter, east_us as a string here. Now, when you're using this, there might be a possibility, and we don't want this to happen. So someone calling this particular Bicep template, they might use North Europe, or maybe it's some different location, so Canada location for the particular deployment. But if you want to restrict the users, if you want to restrict the users for a specific values, so here I have taken a quick example of what is allowed in terms of the region, but you can pick in terms of app service name. Maybe let's say we make it this guy here a string, and we make it, let's say, okay, just let me take this out. So we'll not have a variable there. So we have an app service name defined here. And this we can just define, it is going to be my app service, okay, or east_us. So now you can see here, right? It's the IDE, that's Visual Studio Code. Once we have installed Bicep into it, it is smart enough to tell me here that the expected value is either east_us or my app service. But you have provided east_us too. If you just change it to east_us, it will be happy with this. And all the services that you're looking at, you will be able to see that what is that, if there is any issues with with the declaration, if there is any issues with the particular definition of the resource, it will start giving you those curly lines underneath them. So basically, if you see the app service declared multiple times, just because I was doing it for this demo, I have it a couple of times defined in the same thing. Okay. Now, there will be a lot of places where we will be, let me just get rid of all these for now. So there'll be a lot of places where we will be needing likes of conditional expressions. So let's say if we are creating let's say we have an application which requires an app service, which requires a SQL database and other couple of things. But that deployment we are going to do for 4 different environments, or maybe we are going to do it for production and non-production. Okay, in that case, we are not going to write the code for production separately and then non-production separately, and then we are going to define, okay, what is going to be changed. So every time you change your production, you have to go back and change in your non-production as well. So there will be no consistency between your production and non-production. And that's the problem that we are addressing here, that the consistency should be everywhere. And all the deployments that is happening in a different environment, or maybe let's say if your different branch office is having a deployment, you should be having the same deployment on the other side as well. And if there is anything changes to one side, it should be changing into other side as well, unless there is a specific need. So that's where we need the conditional expressions, where we are looking at specifics of, let's say here we have an example. So let's say we are deploying a storage account and we want to pick the SKU of that storage account. Okay, so if it is a production environment, what you are going to do is you are going to take a right above this, you are going to define a parameter which is going to be environment type. And if it is a string and you want to define, let's say, dev. Okay, what happens here is it's normal as any programming language. So what happens here is you are evaluating the condition here, which is basically environment type. If that is equal to production, prod here. Okay, which is not, then what will happen is, if it is equal, if let's say if I change this to prod, what will happen is the storage account will get the SKU of standard GRS, which is globally redundant. If we change that to anything apart from prod, it's not just dev, anything apart from prod, let's say UAT, what will happen is it will get a standard LRS. So that's how we are making sure the consistency between the environments are there, but the lower environments like of UAT or pre-prod or your like SIT environments are getting a lower SKU, which is not costing you that much. Same for the Azure. Let's say if there is any app service plan, you can pick and choose between what SKU that you want to go with. And even it's basically up to you how you want to use this and where you want to use this. It's basically going to give you a flexibility in picking and choosing between multiple SKUs, multiple like namings and everything. Now there is another like an example where we can look at how we can utilize the conditions. So which is going to be more of this was I say inline conditions that we looked at. Now we want to see what is going to be our approach. Let's say we want to make sure, okay, if someone is asking for an web app service, then only deploy an app service plan. That's a small example. Okay, or maybe if it is a production environment. Okay, or maybe if the user is saying, okay, if user is picking the drop down and saying, okay, through the app service deployment, you want a storage account deployed, yes, then only deploy a storage account. At that point of time, what we do is we define the condition within the resource configuration here, which is basically what we are looking at is once you define your resource, you give the condition here, which is basically if deploy to storage account. And here what we have done is, oh, sorry. So basically here what we have done is we have parameterized the deploy to storage account, which is here, and we have taken it as a Boolean. So this guy, if I try to do it, this guy will take either true or false. So that's the only option we have here, what we can do here. So basically it's going to be either true or false. So if it is true, so if I go in here, if it is true, this guy will deploy. If it is false, this guy will not deploy. Okay. Instead, if I wanted to do this, if I wanted to do this a different way, I can say, let's say if it is just deployed for prod. And I'll just change this to string instead. And if I say prod, then only this guy will deploy. If there is anything apart from prod, this will not deploy. Okay. Similarly, what we can do is we can do loops. So if you're looking at Bicep, right, it is basically bringing in a lot of programming concepts that we used to do. It's basically you can use the loops. You have seen the variables. You have seen the parameters. You have seen. Now we are going to see the loops. So basically, let's say you have 10 different storage accounts, right? You don't want to keep copy pasting this whole code and paste and creating multiple storage account one by one after another. That's basically breaking the concept, and that's basically like you're doing repeated work for the same thing. So here, what you can do is you can parameterize an array, and you can get a full list of, let's say, 10 different things. So these are the storage account names. We know the storage account configuration is going to be remain the same. Probably we can take another loop, which is going to be a nested loop. We are going to see that later on as well. So if you start with this, resources here is created with storage account resource. You have defined the same way you are going to define the resource. We saw the very first example. Anything here is Nothing here is changed. We have just added another bit, which is a for loop here. So for loop, what we are going to do here is storage account name, okay, in all the storage account names. So basically, it will loop through the storage account names. It will start picking up from this, which is going to stored in the storage account name. And that storage account name you can use in the actual name section of the resource configuration. And this will loop through it. This will deploy 3 different storage accounts with the same configuration that we have asked for. Just the names of those will be created with this, which is basically your specific names that you define. So basically what it is doing is it is looping through the array that you have given, and based on that array, it is giving you all those different resources with the different names. Okay, now moving along, we have another example of loops, which is basically, so this is more of I know the storage account names and I want to deploy that. But what if you want to deploy a storage account, okay, and you don't want to give the names. You want it to be like, oh, my company storage account 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 or whatever, until whatever you want. Okay, that's basically your choice. So what we do here is you start with the same thing. This format is not going to change, the resource deployment format. All you are going to do is add in and subtract from that particular pieces. What you do here is you do a for loop, but here you can pick in anything. This can be if it is I, if it is j, if it is k, it doesn't matter. This is one of the variables that you are giving for the which you are going to reference inside that for loop. This basically is giving you, and what we are going to say here is loop through the range of 1 to 4. This you can increase whatever you want, 4 to 400, 1 to 400, 1 to 4000, 1 to 4, or whatever you want. So what this is going to do is this is going to iterate the same thing for 4 times, or whatever range that you give. Let's say if we give 40, it is going to iterate for 40 times, deploy 40 storage accounts. Every time when we do the storage account here, every time the storage account gets created, it will pick the I value from here. So let's say if it is a first iteration, the I value here will be, let me just close this, go back. The I value will be 1. If it is the 10th iteration, the I value is going to be 10. Okay, so every time the storage account name is going to be SA10 and it will get deployed. So that's how you do the iteration based on a specific range. So at any point of time, let's say if you need 15 storage accounts to be deployed, go with the iteration instead of deploying one by one, instead of copying the same storage account code and then copying it 10 times. That will also work. It doesn't matter. But under the hood, if you start looking at under the hood, that will look like a poor code. Okay. Now, there is another concept. So basically, when we do the loops, what happens is everything deploys in parallel. Okay. So for some reason, let's say if you want to like slice it down, so there is 40 storage accounts getting deployed at one point of time. Okay. Instead, or maybe let's say if it is app service, you don't want, and if you are doing some upgrade or something like that, and you have or maybe any other service where you don't want all the services to start working at a single time, right? What you can do is you can define a batch size. So basically, you defined here 30. Okay. What this will do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 until 30. There is 30 app services will start deploying at a time. Okay. But if you do a batch sizing in that piece, what will happen is you can basically define how many services will start deploying at a time. So the batch size, let's say if I do it five app services will start deploying at a time. When those five will be in succeeded state, then what will happen is the next five will pick it up. Okay. Basically, that's going to give you a little bit of flexibility in terms of wherever you need and wherever you are doing it for scaling purpose, or wherever you are looking at from updates perspective, that will help you out within your deployments. Okay. So the last bit that I have here, before going into that, I will go back the first thing that I mentioned, which is going to be the modules. Okay. And for that, I will show you a real life code, what we have here. So this was basically just a file created for this particular demo. But if you look at this piece here, so we have, this is for one of the customers that I have done, and it's all the code specific to the modules that we are looking at. So it's basically every item that the customer needed, we have modularized it here. So let's say if you want to create a NSG, if you want to create a public IP address, if you want to create a route table, and if you want to create a recovery services vault, you can just straight away create it. So let's say if I pick a small example of NSG over here, right? Okay. So you know what all parameters are going to be in there, and you don't want the other things to affect it. So the NSG is not going to be a really great example here. I'll say, let me just pick something else. Yeah. So basically public IP address, let's pick the public IP address. Okay. So public IP address is basically what you have for deploying any public IP address. Either it can be for virtual network gateway, it can be for a NAT gateway, it can be for a virtual machine, or whatever requires public IP address. So you can basically refer this public IP address module in that particular deployment, and you can use that public IP for the deployment. So basically, you define everything based on your company needs or based on the resource needs, and you refer to that in any of your deployments. And whenever you are doing that reference, what will happen is it will pick up everything. So let's say I have here a lot of optional things. So if you see likes of, if you want FQDN on that or not, if you want a domain name labeling or not, you want to do you want to enable the diagnostic settings or not. So based on the requirements, you can put in the optional requirements and you can put in the non-optional requirements. You can also, for the actual parameter, so let's say here I have location, let's say. Okay. So you can just pick and choose between let's say basically you don't want any of your public IP addresses to be a basic SKU. So you can just change it here, which will be like, oh, I'll only do standard. Then no one will be able to pass standard or basic public IP requirement using this particular module. Okay. The whole idea behind creating modules is you can make smaller packages of what you need, or the smaller packages of specific resources and that you can utilize in going forward in your deployments. Okay, the same way we have here, you can see the connectivity, the management and identity, every subscription based on the enterprise scale landing zone. You can deploy that to a particular I can quickly scroll through here. So basically, if you see here, let's see a very small example. So this is basically a deployment of a virtual network, which is picking up what is going to be your virtual network ID and everything. It is just referencing the previous module, and you are getting all the details out of it. Okay. So that was more of looking at what all Bicep can do here, okay, and some Bicep code. The very next thing, there is a couple of advanced concepts, and there is a lot more, and I'm going to share some references for around that, which is going to be really helpful for understanding biceps or starting with bicep templates. Okay, so if you look at specific of the first one, which is basically deployment script to a bicep template. So basically deployment script is nothing but your CLI code or PowerShell code. So let's say you want to run some PowerShell commands, or if you want to run some PowerShell, uh, which is basically, I'll say, yeah. So which can be like, let's say 10 different sketch steps to configure a domain controller or enable something within the particular virtual machine. 10 different commands which is going to configure something on an app service. So which is basically going to be running inside. So it is more of a desired state configuration that we have the concept. So that you can embed to the bicep templates using deployment scripts. Unfortunately, I cannot show that today, but this is one of the concepts that we should be aware of, that you can embed your CLI or PowerShell codes within your bicep templates. The next one is using template specs. Template specs is nothing but, instead of deploying the bicep template, right, what you do is you uh, instead of deploying, what you do is you go with publishing that particular template into Azure, and which is basically can be used later on for the deployment. And when you do the deployment at the later on stage, it will work as a package for you. Okay, so the same way you deploy anything from marketplace, and what happens is you can you can just simply deploy you can just simply fill in the form and deploy that particular stuff. You don't need to go through all the functionality. You don't need to check what is good, what is there, what is not, and everything. You just fill in the form and you deploy. Same thing will happen when you publish it into template spec. And also you can keep on maintaining versions of it. So like, let's say you have some bicep template, you made some changes, and you made the version to 1.2, and at some point of time that 1.2 broke something. Then always you can go back, you can just pick the version 1.1.0, and then you can deploy that. That is basically going to help you out in maintaining the versioning as well for that. You can also maintain the versions within Azure DevOps and GitHub, and there is certain ways of setting up the direct deployment CI/CD pipelines of deploying that bicep code directly from Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. So we are not going to take a look at this today, but I'm going to share a really nice resource that we have, which is basically this guy. So if you take a look at Microsoft Learn, which gives you learning paths, just Google this fundamentals for of bicep. You will find this learning path, and it is not just fundamentals. So the learning path includes three areas, which is, first one is starting with fundamentals of bicep. Second is you get the intermediate bicep concept and the advanced bicep concept. what we have, a couple of them we have seen. Apart from that, you have the deployment configurations as well. So how do you configure with Azure DevOps pipelines with your build and release both pipelines, and as well as how you can do it with GitHub Action. So you can set up a continuous delivery with GitHub or Azure DevOps as well. Just go through this. This is going to be a really good start for you. Yeah, with this, I'll leave that. And thank you so much for joining me today, and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thanks.